Alright guys, I'm going to be talking about Legion, a character who I'm pretty comfortable with. I think is really strong and pretty underrated. Um, First things first, I'm going to talk about his add-ons, which ones are good, which ones aren't, and what they can kind of be used for. And then I'm going to talk about the perks he can run, the combinations you can do, and what I personally like to run on him. So, starting off on the weaker end, I'm going to talk about his buttons. So, his smiley pin button. Well, first I need to talk about his power. His power, Feral Frenzy, lets you enter a frenzy, which gives you a speed boost, extend your lunge range, and lets you vault pallets. Um, in this phase, in this state, you can also frenzy attack people, which or the Feral Slash, which will let you injure fully healthy survivors and put healthy and injured survivors into the deep wound state. His deep wound lasts for a couple of seconds, and it lets you chain off of that. So once you hit the first survivor, you activate Killer Instincts, which lets you see the heartbeat of all survivors within your terror radius, plus an extra 4 meters, if I'm correct. A small thing that can and cannot make a difference depending on what you're trying to do, which I'll go into later. So anyways, his smiley pin buttons, the smiley pin button and the other buttons with them are okay, and they definitely get stronger as I go. So the smiley pin button applies the blindness status effect for all characters who are revealed by Killer Instinct and have the Feral Frenzy applied to them. That lasts for 60 seconds, but blindness isn't really a big deal with Legion. It's not like they have any objectives that they try to reach or like teammates, especially because he'll injure a lot of teammates, but he won't actually down them until he goes out of his M1 state, into his M1 state. Next is the defaced smiley pin, which is an okay one for Legion, and that's because when you're getting into a frenzy state, especially if you're hitting more than one person, what you can do is whoever you've applied the mangle to, you can either choose to follow one, depending on how many people you inflict the frenzy on. If it's one or two, then you can go after the person you had initially hit if they were both nearby, and leave the person with the mangled to deal with the mangled, because his teammates will have to heal him, or he'll have to either self-care or stay injured. The thing about it though is that because everyone is put into the deep wound state afterwards, it kind of eats out that time. So if it's for the couple seconds that they're mending, which is about like 5 to 10, that's 5 to 10 seconds that's actually taken off their mangled. So instead of a full minute, it's only 50 seconds. But if you can hit a large group or all of them with your frenzy attack, then you can follow one of them, and the other two, as soon as they finish mending, are going to try to heal. They're going to try to heal in a group, which means that they're going to have to deal with the Sloppy Butcher effect without you actually having to use the perk slot for Sloppy. Next, we have the Legion pin, which is the strongest pin he has, because this one applies the broken status effect on them for a minute. And the reason that's such a big deal, especially for Legion, and some of the perks he can run, is that since they can't heal, if he happens to bump into them or bump into them while they're trying to heal after the 60 seconds, that's 60 seconds of them basically being exposed. If you can apply the frenzy effect, that's 60 seconds of them being exposed that they can't do anything about, other than hide or hope that you don't catch whoever you're chasing and switch over to them. Going back to the Browns, his scratched ruler and his etched ruler are both okay perks or add-ons. The issue with these is that you're never really in a massive race to get your frenzy back up, because if you miss it, you're still in the chase with that person, and if you've gotten out of it, then you're probably in a chase with whoever you've gotten out of. You're never really in a need for your frenzy. It's just convenient to have, or like if everybody is healed, then that's the only time that you really need it, but it fills up pretty fast, so it's never an issue where you're saying, oh my god, if this was so much quicker, I'd be able to get this. So it's a whatever type of perk. but you can use it with other add-ons like Frank's Mixtape, which will knock you out of it a lot. Um, but even then, that's kind of an iffy situation. Um, Next, we have the Mischief List, the Mural Sketch, and the Stolen Sketchbook. And these ones are actually really strong. I'd say they're some of his strongest add-ons because even though you can chain them from person to person, if at his full 32-meter radius, if you have somebody on the edge of it, you won't be able to make it without any of these add-ons. Even the Mischief List will just barely have you able to make it. But the Mural Sketch will almost guarantee you for whoever's in your terror radius, and the Stolen Sketchbook will on occasion let you get people who are outside the terror radius, or after you attack somebody and look for somebody or look for other people with the killer instinct. That'll usually make sure that you can get at least one of them, and then from there keep going. But yeah, those are his strongest add-ons. And then you have the Friendship Bracelet, the Never Sleep Pills, and Susie's Mixtape, which are, in my opinion, some of his, not the weakest. They're definitely not his weakest, but they're some of the weakest, mainly because they increase his killer's instinct range, but that doesn't do a whole lot unless you're trying to do like a silent build. And to get into like the numbers specifically, so let's say you have Tinker or Tinker or the one where you I'm sorry. But let's say you don't have a terror radius or you're using the undetectable status. These can, because the killer instinct radius is always 4 meters greater than what your terror radius is. So at base, with this 32-meter radius, you can see people up to 36 meters away with your killer instinct. And these ones increase that, so that would make it 40. This would make it... this would make it 44. And Susie's is actually a little bit nuts because hers can give you an extra 16 meters. So if you're running a silent build, that can get you up to 20 meters just running Susie's Mixtape, which can actually let you run other things. You don't need to stack double of these if you have Susie's on, which is actually pretty okay. But running them in a regular build is actually a bit detrimental because, like I said, unless you're running the extension add-ons to give him longer frenzy duration, these will just kind of screw you over because a lot of the times you think you can make it, or you have the idea once you're comfortable with Legion that you can make it, and you'll always come short if you're running these add-ons. Just barely, but you'll always come short. Then that also covers all of the yellows, except for Julie's, which is the cooldown ones. Julie's, Joey's, and the Cold Dirt do cool down the stun after he uses Feral Frenzy. And they're okay ones, especially if you stack them. But a bit of the issue is that they don't actually do a whole lot. Cold Dirt actually takes off 0.6 seconds from his Frenzy, and the Joey's Mixtape takes off 0.4. So if you run these two, you'll take off a second off of his relatively long stun. I think it's like a 4-second stun that he has to deal with. But nothing to brag about. Like, these actually aren't super strong. You'll feel them, but they're not like super strong. And in his greens, like I said, we've already covered Susie's, we've covered the Sketchbook, and we've covered Joey's and the Legion pin. But the Nasty Blade increases the amount of time you have to, the survivors have to mend after you hit them with it. The green one will add on an extra 1.5 seconds to what I think is like a 9-second mend. And the Filthy Blade will add on a 2.5 second So that's an extra 10 to that's an extra that takes it up to 10 to 11 seconds, which is okay, but it's not super strong because I mean, it's okay. So having a mend, depending on what you're running, can actually be a big deal or not do very much because when they're mending for like the 10 seconds, if you hit everybody, that's a total of 40 seconds between all survivors that nobody's doing anything. Um, and if you have something like Ruin running where for 10 seconds nobody can work on the generators because they're trying to mend, that is a pretty significant thing. Um, but in a general, like, in a general situation, these don't do much, but there are some perks you can pair them with that can make them pretty good. Um, and as a general note, like I think that Legion's very rare add-ons are a little disappointing because this one, so the cold dirt is only like a half a second off of his off of the cooldown for his frenzy. The filthy blade, depending on what you're running, can not even matter all that much. It helps, but I mean, anything that can buff, increase the amount of times survivors are stuck dealing with something, or decrease the amount of times, the amount of time that you have to do something like recover or worry about frenzy refilling. It's it's something, you know. But Frank's mixtape and the stab wound study, I have to say, are borderline useless. Frank's mixtape, especially because of the way they had reworked him and not most of his add-ons. So the thing about Frank's mixtape and the Legion when he came out was that he could actually hit people with deep wounds multiple times and take chunks out of their men bars. But after they reworked him and made it so that if you hit a deep wounded survivor, you would lose it. So this, especially because it does take a chunk out, but while they're running, it doesn't drop, and while they're mending, it doesn't drop. So unless you continue the chase with them, or they just are oblivious to the fact, it doesn't really matter. And on top of that, it does knock you out of your Pharaoh Frenzy, give you the cooldown, and set your Frenzy bar all the way down to 0. Um, Stamwound Study is in a very similar situation because, yeah, it decreases the mend time of all survivors, but as long as they're running, it doesn't go down, and as long as they're mending, it doesn't go down. So there's no downside to it being shorter. It could be 5 to 6 seconds, and as long as they're not doing something else, it really doesn't matter. So his purples are a little underwhelming, honestly. And then his pink add-ons are actually, in my opinion, pretty solid. So his Eerie button lets him extend his tear radius to the entire map, which you can combo with certain perks, which I'll admit they aren't great perks. So unnerving presence, colorophobia, they're perks that work with his um, tear radius, but they're not a massive deal. And the ability to break pallets, which can be kind of helpful, especially if you run it with Enduring Spirit Fury or something, which is pretty okay on Legion. It's not a bad combo, because if you go for those ones, if they stun you while you're in your frenzy, that actually immediately knocks you out of it because the stun is shorter than his cooldown from the frenzy. So you getting stunned by a pallet is always better than actually taking the cooldown because the pallet is more or less instant. Um, but another thing is that because his tear radius affects the whole map, this is a good information tool because if you hit one person, you know where everybody in the game is at. So even if you're not actually breaking pallets with it, you can use it as an information tool to figure out what you need to do next, where everybody is, and if they're injured, who, who was around where, to keep track of who's who. Then his Fuming mixtape is an okay one. Again, you can combo it with perks, but what this one does is it lets you see generator progress, as it says, generator progress by the intensity of their auras. So when it's red, it's really close to being done. When it's white, there's no progress on it. And this one you can use to tell like where you should take your pop to, or where people might be, and depending on what kind of build you're running. Like if you're carrying unnerving presence, like where you could go to possibly get them to miss skill checks or things like that. Um, and it's a good information tool. A lot like the button, it does let you figure out where people are, but I'd say it is definitely weaker than the eerie button. But it's not bad. Next, I'm going to talk about the perks that do and don't work on Legion, why that is, and which ones you can kind of combo together, or which ones work better with Legion. Nurse's Calling gives you a 28-meter range to see the auras of people healing, close to within 28 meters of you. But the thing is, because he has a 38-meter radius, once you kind of get there, it tells you where they're at, but because mending doesn't count, and if you're playing as playing against the Legion, if everybody's injured, it's kind of a hassle for everybody to keep healing, which people generally don't do, or if they do, it'll actually cost them gen times in the game. So it's not one that's super worth running on Legion, but because you can get everybody injured, it has its moments. Barbecue, you can or can't use it. Barbecue is optional because since he's so good at tracking with both his pink add-ons and with Frenzy itself, you don't need barbecue. But like I said, if everyone's injured and you're just trying to fight injured people, or like after you hook somebody, it lets you go quickly from one target to the next. So this definitely lets you keep pressure on the survivors. Blood Echo, I think, is actually one of his strongest perks. And that is a perk that I always run in every build with him, because as people are injured, which you can do very easily, you can injure 2 to 3 people in one frenzy very quickly, and because of that, so they'll either always stay injured because healing would take too much time and takes time off of generators. Let you apply this to survivors pretty consistently, and especially if you're at a point where you're kind of snowballing, you can hook a survivor, have this applied to other survivors, so things like Dead Hard, Sprint Burst, Live, Balanced Landing, none of those will trigger, which makes your chases a lot easier. And generally you can catch survivors if they're not that far, either with a couple seconds left on this for the 60-second cooldown, or or right as it ends, so that you can chain it, have it apply again, and keep attacking survivors one after another, which if you use with barbecue is actually pretty strong, because you can hook a survivor, apply the exhaustion status effect, see where all the survivors are with barbecue and chase after them, and then once you've gotten them down, you can repeat the cycle of apply Blood Echo, see where they are with barbecue, and chase. And that one's a pretty solid combo. Brutal Strength actually isn't that bad. It's a pretty solid perk to run on Legion, because you won't really, when you're injuring survivors, it's usually gonna be with your Feral Frenzy. So if there's pallets in the way, you can vault over them, and once you have people injured, and after that it's just a base killer looping. They're usually going to try to put pallets between you so that they can gain space, and that more or less, it mitigates some of the impact. It makes it a lot easier to chase survivors through things like shack or really strong loops, because you can break things faster. And with how many maps are starting to actually have breakable walls, like Dead Dog Saloon or the Midwich Elementary map, along with the new paths they're gonna be bringing into Batum and the Yamaoka estate, Brutal Strength can definitely help to get walls open in the early game. Colorophobia is just colorophobia. You know, you can pair it with the Legion, with the iridescent pin, but it's just not a big deal. It's again kind of like Nurse's Calling, where once they're in your terror radius, they're not really gonna heal, so it's whatever. Dark Devotion is one that I actually do have a lot of fun with, though, because and I was saying it earlier when I was talking about some of the add-ons he has. If you can run this to give yourself undetectable, or combo with something like Deathbound, which makes them oblivious, it's really hard for them to keep track of you, and especially when you're undetectable with things like this, or Tinker, wherever Tinker is, while you're undetectable, you can actually pair it up with one of these so that you have a 20-meter killer instinct range that they can't hear you from. So normally, if they hear your heartbeat and see that somebody's had deep wounds applied to them, they'll know to just bail. But with this, you can see them and they don't know it. So you can sneak up on them even in your frenzy and chain hits like that. Plus, especially because Legion is such a short and one of the more human-looking survivors, they won't notice you. So if you have like Bush Party Legion or Christmas Sweater Susie, you know, you're not very you blend in pretty well. You're not very suspicious. So that's one of the better things I like about Legion, especially with their cosmetics, is that you can have them more or less look like any other survivor. So that makes some of the undetectable ones a little bit better. And another bonus to them being kind of this smaller, one of the smaller height survivors, is that it's easier for other survivors to lose track of you when looping on stuff that they would normally be able to keep track of with with taller killers. So Dark Devotion is one that I like to run for stealth builds, especially because Legion can stealth a lot better than other survivors. Once he has it off, he's, in my opinion, not quite on par, but pretty close to Ghostface. And then Dead Man Switch, it's one that can work, but it's Dead Man Switch, you know, you can only get it off a couple times. But you can push survivors off of your generator pretty easily, because like I said, once they hear your terror radius and see that deep wounds has been applied, they might just kind of bail, but they might also stick it out, because when you're in your feral frenzy, other than being injured, there's not a lot to be afraid of, because you can't actually down anybody with your frenzy. So this can be a hit or miss depending on what kind of survivors you're dealing with. Deathbound is another one that I said I like for stealth builds, and especially because he has the ability to injure survivors so quickly, you can get this off surprisingly high amount of times. Especially if they're not near each other or they split up because you started chasing one or the other. It's a pretty good tool to sneak up on survivors, and one that I like a good bit. Franklin's is actually one that doesn't work too well with him, because like I said, the only time you're really hitting people with your M1 is when you're putting them into the dying state, or if you just happen to catch them off guard. So Franklin's isn't that big of a deal. Devour Hope, Haunted Ground, and something that I actually want to mention about Devour Hope and all of the exposed status perks is that his Feral Frenzy doesn't let you apply, or his Feral Frenzy doesn't apply the status effect when they're when you hit them with the Feral Strike, because it's an alt attack, so you can't down anybody with it. So unless they're fully healed, which generally they won't be, perks like Haunted Ground or Devour Hope actually aren't that big of a deal. Noed, again, the same kind of deal with the exposed effect. Retribution, you have well enough tracking with his add-ons and his ability itself, so, you know, not necessary. Ruin can actually be pretty solid because, like I said, and it's more it's on the same kind of thought process of Dead Man Switch, of it can be kind of hit or miss. They can either choose to stick it out if they know you have it and they're gonna finish it out if you're in your feral state, or they can bail and you'll get regression on it. But especially when everybody's injured and you're just a base killer, this can actually be kind of strong, because if everybody's injured, nobody wants to take the chance to get hooked. So a lot of people will bail, and you can get some ruin value. Um, Third seal, again, you're not basic attacking, so this isn't applied all that much until you put them into the dying state, and it's whatever. Might as well run um, knockout. Infectious Fright is actually pretty solid on Legion. Um, like I said, he has enough tracking for himself, but if you know people within the vicinity, this actually covers anything that his Feral Frenzy wouldn't, because your Feral Frenzy lets you keep track of people when you're frenzying, and this lets you keep track of people when they're not frenzying, all within your terror radius. So you can snowball with Infectious Fright, and because he'll only ever put people into the dying state with his base attack, it's pretty strong. Iron Maiden is one of his 3 perks, but it's not a particularly good one because, like I said, the exposed status effect doesn't mean a whole lot. And if they're in the locker, searching it doesn't really mean much. The search speed isn't a big deal for Legion. Mad Grit is his 2nd perk. And this one, it's a perk that you can run with a basement build, but the survivors have to be going against all survivor common sense for you to get value out of this, unless they're one of those very, like, 4-man, nobody's gonna be left behind type of survivor groups. This isn't a big deal. Make your choice. Again, and it can be a little bit better because it actually goes on for a long time, for the full minute, and you can get distance with your you can get distance pretty easily. So this one isn't one that you can always get value out of because Feral Frenzy, but it's not a bad one to run, especially in the earlier games if you're having like a rough go or you miss your first frenzy attack, which can be pretty devastating for Legion depending on how your first attack goes. If you miss, then you've got to wait for your whole thing to come back, plus you're probably going to be in the chase with the one survivor who actually managed to dodge it. If you hit one survivor, you've only got one survivor, so you haven't really gotten all that much value, you just really M1 them. And if you can get a whole group, then that's your best start. But this one it can be useful, but less often than you'd think. Monitor and Abuse is actually a pretty solid one, and one that I was using for his builds for a pretty good while, because so when your terror radius is smaller, you can sneak up on survivors as a 115 killer. You can sneak up on survivors and and practically close the distance on them before they actually notice that you're trying to do anything. And because you're the Legion and you look so human, it might actually take them a second to realize that you're the Legion, even if they can see you, if they don't see your red stain. So it's not a terrible one to run. And this can either be a positive or a negative, but I found it to be a bit of a hindrance for the same reason that his that things like Susie's mixtape or the Stay Awake Never Sleep pills weren't that good, was because when you're in a chase with a survivor, even if it's in your frenzy, that takes your terror radius up from 32 to 40 meters, plus the 44, or plus the 4 from just having his Feral Frenzy active, means that you're going to see survivors 44 meters away with your Killer Instinct, as opposed to the usual 36. So that can sometimes get in your way, and like I said, have it so that it looks like they're within range, but actually be just short. Nemesis, you can pair it with things, like I said before, like Dark Devotion, which can let you switch switch obsessions. I'm sorry, I forgot the word. Which can let you switch obsessions, but also gives the survivors the Oblivious status effect. So, which I think is a pretty cool combo. If you hit somebody, if somebody stuns you with Nemesis, and let's say it knocks you out of your Feral Frenzy, they're Oblivious, and then if you hit them, now he carries the terror radius, which he can't hear, and On top of that, he can't hear you, and none of the other survivors can hear you. So you really have disappeared, which I think is really strong. Pop Goes the Weasel is pretty strong because Pop Goes the Weasel, and because if everyone is injured, you can get some pretty solid pot value going from gen to gen and from survivor to survivor, especially towards the end. That lets you pretty much hold any 3 gen you want and hold the game out for as long as you can. Ranker, again, the exposed status effect can make it difficult to actually pull that off because either they're injured and it doesn't matter, or they're healthy and unless you go through the trouble of trying to hit them with the M1 while they're healthy, if they're not that close to you or if they keep dropping pallets between you, it's just difficult. Remember me, again, you're injuring people more with your special attack than you are with your basic attack, so you can't really build up stacks. Save the best for last. Same thing, you can't really build up stacks, and whenever you can, it doesn't really matter because the only time you're hitting somebody with the basic attack is when you're putting them into the dying state. So it's not like being able to recover from putting someone in the dying state is a big deal, you know? So these two don't work particularly well with him. Spies from the Shadows is okay, I suppose. You know, it's extra tracking, but you don't really need it. Thanat, I've actually found can and cannot work because generally you'll have like 2 or 3 survivors injured at all times, but that's only 8 to 12%, so you'll never get like the full value out of this unless it's later in the game, and at that point survivors aren't working on gens and trying to heal, or you can apply enough pressure just being a basic killer that it kinda doesn't matter. But this can help. If you injure everybody with the frenzy attack early in the game, you can get some Thanat value. So you can take it or leave it, but this can be pretty helpful at times. Thrilling Tremors is another perk that I think works really well with him, and less tracking, or more in the sense of barbecue. Not that it tells you where survivors are, but it kind of tells you where you need to put your pop at if you're running Pop Goes the Weasel. So this can be extra tracking, but it also tells you where to put your pop at, which is the main reason I like to run it. And then Tinker and Trail of Torment are other perks that let you gain the undetectable status, which I think can be pretty good in a undetectable Legion build. Whispers is an interesting perk for Legion because he has plenty of tracking, but at the end of the game when there's only 2 survivors around, you know, they're probably both injured. You can find one, but you can't find the other, and if you frenzy to find the other one, then you've lost the first one. So Whispers can help with that, but it really only helps in endgame scenarios. The rest of the time, your natural tracking just overrules it. Corrupt Intervention is actually really strong and something that I want to talk about because so with Corrupt Intervention, you block off 3 different generators of the 7, which means that with the 4 available, survivors are going to be more likely to group up. So if you combo it with something like Discordance, the Legion's 3rd, and his best perk, and one of his better perks in general, it lets you get groups of survivors better, find their group, and then injure everybody. So Corrupt Intervention is actually pretty strong with Legion because it lets you get a lot of that early game pressure. And like I said, Discordance lets you find that early game pressure. So whether you have Corrupt Intervention or not, survivors will usually spawn in groups of 2 or 3. So if you can, so if they start working on a generator together as a group of 2 or 3, you're guaranteed 2 or 3 injures, which can be a pretty big deal for your beginning, and is the reason I always run Discordance on Legion. Enduring is also another pretty solid perk because, like I said, getting stunned means you don't have to go through the 4-second cooldown, but rather his 1.25 second cooldown with pallet stuns, or with this, it's a less than a second stun that cuts a big chunk out of what would normally be your cooldown. So running Resilience or Enduring and something like Spirit Fury, the Enduring Spirit Fury combo, is pretty strong. Gearhead not that great actually, because you do need to get 2 basic attacks, which you won't do very often. Um, and when you do, like I said, you'll be putting them into the dying state. So of the 30 seconds that you see people with, or that it's activated, you're gonna spend a couple of those seconds, up to 10 to 15, depending on where your hooks are at and what kind of position you're in, to hook them. So you don't get a whole lot of value out of this, and it's not a very good perk for Legion. I'm all ears can actually be a pretty solid perk for him, because if you're in a situation where you're trying to catch somebody, or you've applied your the the deep wound status, you catch up to them, you stop, and they try to vault out while you're in your stun. This lets you keep track of them for the time that you're stunned and a little bit after. So this can be a pretty alright perk with Legion. Um, but you know, it has a um, but it's you've got alright tracking at that point, anyways, because you can hear them. So unless they're running something like Iron Will, it's not a super big deal. But it can help you through mind games and things like that if you're around pallets. Knockout is actually an alright one with him, especially for slugging builds, because like I said, a lot of the times when you're applying the M1, anytime you're putting them into the dying state, it's going to be with the basic attack. So that means that that none of the survivors can see them within the 16-minute range. They're always slower for those first couple seconds, and they can't see anybody. So this one is one that you can actually always get value out of, but is not something you're going to do very often unless there's a group of 2 or more survivors, which can be, but slugging in general just isn't that popular of a tactic unless it was somebody like Hillbilly or Bubba. But you can get use out of this as Legion. So that one is one you can use. Then Overwhelming Presence, you compare it with the Iridescent Pin. Sloppy is actually not very useful, because you're not landing your basic attacks until they're downed, and at that point, it doesn't matter because they're downed. And once they're off the hook, like, yeah, they have the sloppy effect, but are they gonna get healed too? So the only thing you really have running is the hemorrhage effect, which isn't a big deal. Spirit Fury, you can combo with Enduring. Strider, you can actually get some pretty solid use out of. It'll always counter things like Iron Will, and because everybody's injured, that does let you hear all survivors a little bit more, whether they're injured or not. So this is a pretty good perk to run on Legion. Not one that I run personally, because there's a lot of better perks, but it's one that if you're having trouble tracking or you lose track of people, you can and will always get value if they're running Iron Will, which is a pretty popular survivor perk. Surge, for the same reason that Knockout is good, is the reason that I like to run this, especially Surge with Modern Abuse. This has a set tear radius, or a set radius of 32 meters, as opposed to being tied to your tear radius. So if you get a hit that ends the chase, your tear radius goes down to 24 meters, and you've applied Surge to a 32-meter radius. So that's pretty solid. And one that I run sometimes. Unnerving Presence, again, Eerie Button. So the builds that I'm going to be talking about are ones that I think are kind of fun, and ones that I think are pretty strong. So my general build is Blood Echo, I'm sorry, you'll have to give me a minute. Blood Echo, Pop, Corrupt, and Discordance. Mainly because what these do, especially, these are very strong in the early game and give you a really good early game setup. Corrupt Intervention makes it so that unless they're all working on different generators for whatever reason, means that you're going to trigger your Discordance more often than not. And because they bunch up more, means that you're going to get 2 or 3 people with your Frenzy attack. And once they're all injured, you can get it down with Blood Echo, apply the exhaustion status, and then use your pop wherever. And another thing that I do like to do, because Corrupt Intervention isn't necessary for Legion, is I'll use Thrilling Tremors to know where to put my pop, which is also pretty strong. because you can either block out anything that people aren't working on and make it 16 seconds where they've either got to just stand there at the gen, or 16 seconds where you can kind of track them down without worrying about gen progress. Plus it tells you, like I said, where to put your pop. Another one that I like, another build that I think is pretty cool is Dark Devotion. Not Deathbound. Where is it? Dark Devotion, Nemesis, Tinker, and Trail of Torment. And then I can do that with something like a Susie's mixtape, and maybe a Legion pin or something. Or if I don't want to do that, I can run just a mural sketch or the stolen sketchbook, so that you can get more value out of his frenzy attack, while being relatively silent. So if you can't get oops, I seem to have lost connection. Sorry about that, I lost connection for whatever reason. But if you can't apply Undetectable with Dark Devotion, you can either trigger it with Tinker, which can be pretty good at 70% for 16 seconds, means that you could get right up to them. And if you're wearing more innocuous clothes to have you blend in with survivors more, like the Christmas sweaters or Frank's varsity jacket, you can actually get surprisingly close to them without them noticing. And Trail of Torment means that if you aren't proccing that, or if Dark Devotion or the Obsession just isn't nearby, you can do that on your own without having to wait for any survivor input, more or less. So that's one that lets you kind of fill in the in-between times, although it does have a 60-second cooldown. But some perks that I'd always recommend having on are Discordance and Blood Echo. I'd say Discordance and Blood Echo are his strongest perks because they let you find groups of survivors, which is his strongest which is his basic ability, or like his whole ability. And then Blood Echo, which means that all the survivors you injured, so any survivors you found with Discordance, you could injure, and then apply the hemorrhage the exhaustion effect onto. And then from there, you can kind of add whatever. So if you feel like Barbecue will help to get those hooks and keep applying pressure, or if you want to apply Brutal Strength, you can do that too, to make sure that you can get through pallets while you're chasing them as a base killer. Bruins to push them off gens and get gen pressure, because especially towards the mid or end of the game, when survivors can't keep up with how much they have to heal, this really comes in handy. Or if you want to fill in something like Monitor to sneak up on survivors, Pop to, apply that extra regression, Thrilling Tremors to kind of direct your popper for more survivor direction when you're not in your frenzy, because that also helps survivors when you're not in your frenzy. The Gnat for any time you're trying to with this, slow down their healing ability, or like apply a lot of healing pressure. That will also let you apply pressure to the gens, which can be helpful but hit or miss. Or Corrupt Intervention to really close in the circle. Those perks are pretty handy. Plus with Discordance, or you could also run this build, so that you can apply find all survivors, injure them, apply the exhaustion, and then use these as a base chase, so that, and Enduring is one that you can run by itself, so you don't need Spirit Fury like you do with some other killers, because Enduring will also just let him out of his frenzy with basically no cooldown. Spirit Fury just makes that better, but it's also pretty predictable and eats up a second perk slot, so if you want the Spirit Fury Enduring, this can also be a pretty strong build. And there are just a couple things I want to say, like between the perks and his add-ons, is that you can do things like use the Legion pin to make sure that you can get the nat value. Because if they're broken, you know, they can't heal out of it, and that's a couple seconds, the 60 seconds that they can't do anything about it. So if you hit 2 or 3 survivors, that's 2 survivors that guaranteed 8% for a minute that they can't work out of. And for everybody else means that, you know, that's 8% slower, that they can't heal, or that they're more likely to have blood echo afflicted on them. But yeah. And then iridescent button, like I've been saying, can work with a lot of the terror radius based perks like Colorophobia, overwhelming presence, unnerving presence can also work with Spirit Fury Enduring, because you break pallets when you vault, so you can vault 2 pallets when they're trying to knock you out of your power, and keep going. And when they finally do get injured and try to stun you, you can just eat the Spirit Fury and then injure them immediately, or down them immediately. But there are a couple caveats to Legion's power that I do want to mention before I kind of wrap up this video. Is that pallets immediately knock you out of your power. So if you're at the beginning of a game, you're after a survivor, and they stun you, your power is gone, or if you miss, your power is gone. The beginning of the game is the most impactful for Legion, because while you can recover afterwards, it's in the beginning that survivors are kind of clumped up, that your power is going to be a massive success or not a big deal. Will apply a lot of injure pressure, and by extension some gen pressure, or whether you're going to spend the first couple seconds trying to catch somebody, eat a stun, and then wait for your frenzy to come back. And that's a lot to kind of deal with in the beginning of the game. And after this, I'm going to show you guys some Legion gameplay and my build, to show how good his certain perks can be, and how my personal build works on Legion. So yeah. Anyways, enjoy the gameplay. Alright, Rancid Arbiter. Not a bad map. Alright, let's see how this goes. This is going to be my first game and my only game, so you guys can get a good kind of look. I'm a rank 1 killer right now, but so that you guys can get a good look at what actual Legion gameplay is instead of just showing off a good game in general. Ah, I didn't make the second one. That one was kind of greedy of me. But you guys are starting to see how strong that, like, just being Legion can be. I was able to get 2 hits, and I probably could have gotten that third one if I was a bit more patient, but, you know, whatever. So this guy is probably not going to be able to make it to the... dead hard. Because of Discordance, I can keep track of them over there and chase this guy down too. The really clever thing about Legion that I think is fun is that he's very directional. You kind of got to get a feel of the survivors to know what you're going to do. So losing the first gen isn't a big deal. I got an injure and a hook, and I know that 2 of them are over there. So it's not too bad. Plus, like I said, I can apply pop here now because I know that this is here and that no other gen is being worked on. And see? She's here, and I'll be able to track down everybody else pretty soon. Sorry if it seems like I'm getting kind of quiet when I'm trying to go for my frenzy attacks, but you gotta be really on point with those. Missing one of those can be devastating. So you do always have to be a little careful with that. And you can see the pressure I'm already applying. I have 4 survivors injured. My discordance is going off, and I already know that everybody else is going to be grouped up, or that they're going to be grouping up to finish that gen right now. So I can apply pop to it yet again, or if not, I'll take a survivor down with me. But see, just because they're injured, they knew that they couldn't finish that gen. I was able to apply pop, and I'm back on the chase with this new, with Steve again, I'm sorry. And if I don't like Steve, I can go after this guy. He's gonna drop this pallet. Just, oof, no he's not. Some of these survivors are ballsy. But right now, if they're not taking time to heal, that means that they're not, which they are. So she's taking off over there. I can do this. And I know that the healed survivor is still back there because he didn't take off. See? I don't care, I'll eat a D-strike. It's one down. And they're back at it. That gen should have a little less than 50%, so I do want to get back to it. Oh, there's 2 survivors on it. And one of them is injured for sure. So what I was trying to do with that, even though they're all injured, I frenzied her so that I could try to see if I could make it so that they couldn't heal or work on the gen, I'm sorry, while they were injured. And you'll see those sporadically heal, but it's not anything super consistent, and I'm able to get after these survivors pretty quickly. They might get that last gen done, but anything else they're working on is going to be out of the question. Ooh, no. So I can stop this gen right here. And there she is. Plus I have Blood Echo applied to 2 of the 3 survivors, who are probably healing right now. This is why I say Legion is strong, because right now that they're all healing, there's not a lot of gen progress being done. Okay, they're gonna get this gen done. Oh no, they're not. They're just here. Yeah, see, one of them is injured, so they can't afford to finish it like that, and I can apply pop again. Then I know this Nancy is injured, so I can go after her. And this David's in here, since he's a bit closer. No, he's not. You can change targets up really easily with Legion, which is what I like about him. The survivors are pretty sharp, though. This is gonna... Oh, well, I'll be able to find them easily. See, and there's David, and I'm sure Nancy's somewhere over here. Oh, they're jumping to gens really quickly. I ignored this gen because I was like, I have time, but apparently I took a bad chase, which was unfortunate. But if I can catch one of them, I'm not going to be able to get out of this. Alright. Now I can just juggle the survivors. And each time I hook them, I can hook them further out to make sure that they can't get to the gates as easily. And now they either have to spend time healing, which I can just undo as Legion with the Feral Frenzy, or they have to come save the David, which is something at higher tiers survivors will almost pride themselves on, is leaving no man behind, which can definitely cost them. So he's dead on hook. If they unhook the David, he's dead. And the Jane should be dead. So with 3 of them injured, she would have to body block for all 3 of them. Which I'm not sure if she can do. Yeah, you can see they're all starting to panic because everybody's trying to make it out. And they're all trying to cover for each other. Ooh, she just got that off too. Okay, a bit unfortunate. I think I may have lost everybody. But you guys can all see how close that game was. The fact that both of these people were just waiting out the time, and that everybody was injured. A bit unfortunate, but I did do pretty alright, I think. If you guys think differently or think that, just kind of disagree with me, I'm alright to have like a conversation in the chat. Or the comments, I'm sorry. But, you know, feel free. I mean, they had DS, borrow time, unbreakable, another DS, borrow time again, third DS, fourth DS, a third borrowed time, another unbreakable. Like you're seeing some patterns here. Unbreakable DS, unbreakable DS, DS and Lithe, dead hard, sprint burst, dead hard. A lot of like really strong perks. I'd say the only ones that like didn't quite fit the build were Stakeout and Plunderer's Instincts. I'm sure she was doing something. But the rest of these got off really strong medkit, got off with really strong builds, were pretty high rank, and one of them even had a Septic Agent. So, you know, think what you want to think. Whatever. I didn't get to use my Crypsis Moris, but you win some, you lose some.